Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, today we're going to talk about the President of the United States and his leadership. And in particular, we're going to talk about leadership bankruptcy, meaning failure, abject failure, and what that means. Well, let's begin at the beginning, the oath of office. What did he sign up? What did he promise? What was his oath in assuming this incredible leadership position? President Trump, taking the oath, said, "I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God." Okay, that's the oath that he took. Well, what's happened in the first 2 weeks? That's where we are now. 2 weeks into this new leader. I think it's important to understand that we live in a democracy, or at least we did. That we, the people, is central and fundamental. That we believe in a rule of law. We believe in fairness and justice to one and to all. We do not, in this country, take an oath of fealty. Now, I'm going to go over a few definitions, literally dictionary definitions, just so we all understand the words that we're going to talk about here today. Let's start with that first one, fealty, from the definition in the dictionary. It says simply loyalty to a lord. Loyalty to a lord. Wow. Okay. Well, that doesn't sound like we the people too much. It sounds much more like an autocrat, which is how he has behaved in these first 2 weeks. Clearly not a leader of the people. So let's talk about that. What does that mean, an autocrat? Because we want to be very clear about the path we're going down. Okay, to begin, an autocrat is a person who has absolute power and rules a country. Well, let's think about that. Absolute power. Isn't our form of government in the United States 3 co-equal branches of government? Yes, it is. The executive, of which Donald Trump is the head, is one of those branches, but only one. There is the legislative branch, the Congress, the House and the Senate. There's also the judiciary, the courts, and at the highest level, the U.S. Supreme Court. So an autocrat would say, no, I don't do that. I want to have absolute power. So continuing just with the definition so that we understand these terms. An autocrat, a person who has unlimited authority. A person who demands complete obedience. A person who behaves in an authoritarian manner. A person who has undisputed influence or power. Okay, so again, if you just look at the first 2 weeks of this leader's presidency, he certainly has made clear that it's his way or the highway, that his authority is the determinate way to go. Demands complete obedience. We've seen that with his nominees to the cabinet and the votes that have occurred when you know these people of good conscience, of good heart, know that these nominees are not the best, are not appropriate. And this person who behaves in an authoritarian manner, well, I've talked about this quite a lot, being transformational rather than transactional. This is a president who's all about transaction. Panama Canal, Greenland, certainly most recently, Gaza. He wants to do the deal, the transaction. He is not there to help others. So keep that notion of an autocrat in mind. And that autocrat requiring, demanding fealty, that he should be treated as a lord. And then juxtapose that with the oath of office, which I shared with you. Well, to be clear, the American people elected Donald Trump. They did. Wasn't a majority, it was not, but it was a plurality. Something less than 50%, but more than Kamala Harris. He, in fact, won more votes than Kamala Harris. Again, not over 50%, not a majority, but more than Kamala Harris. So, the American people elected Donald Trump. But what did they expect? I think this is an important starting point. What did they expect when they elected Donald Trump? Well, we've seen this, we've heard this, we've read this. It's really not in dispute. These people wanted what Donald Trump promised them. They wanted Donald Trump to help them, to help their condition, to help their lives, to help reduce their costs of living. They wanted people to come and do right by them. Now, some people thought we should get rid of illegal aliens. I think most people agree that an illegal alien should have accountability, should not be able to freely be here. But what about helping these people? Helping people in need. Helping people who had an expectation of Donald Trump that they would be helped by him. Well, in these first 2 weeks, there's been over 300 executive orders. None, zero, on helping those that are in need. He's seeking, though, to have this collision course with department after department of the federal government to eliminate jobs, to eliminate services, to eliminate oversight, to eliminate regulations, and the list goes on. Why? Well, again, it's the nature of an autocrat. There could be several reasons, though. Let me just quickly share a few. To diminish the federal government functions, the administrative state, he's trying to do that. We see that each and every day in the actions that he has taken. And his right-hand man, Elon Musk, to shrink government, shrink employees. Why? Because in reducing people, in reducing services, and reducing the functions of government, he then finds cost savings, the money, literally, to give the wealth a tax break. Wealthy people a tax break. I think that's the real mission. Autocrats, another term, oligarchs, want more and more and more. And they often get that at the expense of the people, of those people that are doing the work. Take from the less fortunate, from those in need, and give to the wealthy, those not in need. Sort of a reverse Robin Hood. Take from the common person, the working person, and give to the rich. His transactional style is not determinative. It is local, it is national, and it is global. From ICE raids in a local city, to slashing U.S. AID, to saying he would take over Gaza and America would own, that's a quote, America would own it. This is not the leadership of a man working to help Americans. This is a transactional autocrat, not working to help others, only to transact at others' expense. Now, he had his first foreign visit this week from the president of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu flew to the U.S. Why? Well, to meet with the president, of course, but he did it because he could. You see, the United States is not a party to the International Criminal Court, the ICC. Netanyahu is wanted by the ICC. But he can fly to the U.S. and meet with our convicted felon president, convicted of 34 felonies, including libel for sexual assault, fraud, and a large number of charges, because these two people operate in very autocratic ways. Let's just quickly touch on what happened to Benjamin Netanyahu, and I should say also his ousted security minister, Yoav Gallant. They've been charged with war crimes in Gaza. In a significant escalation in legal actions, the 124-member ICC, the International Criminal Court, says that Netanyahu and Gallant should be detained should they enter a territory that is a party to the ICC. The ICC said there are reasonable grounds, that's a quote, to believe Netanyahu and Gallant, quote, bear criminal responsibility for the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare. It also indicated that they, quote, intentionally and knowingly deprived Gaza's civilian population of essential resources, including food, water, medical supplies, and fuel. So this is the person that President Trump has chosen to meet with first in his first 2 weeks as president. Well, it's all been kind of heavy. Let me be light for just a moment. I'm going to read from a piece from the New York Times by Thomas Friedman. It's called Our Bar Napkin Presidency, February 4th, 2025. And Thomas Friedman begins his column this way. I'll just read part of it. When I look at the torrent of executive orders and tariffs President Trump has issued since taking office, I fear I'm watching the real-life version of that certified financial planner board commercial that tries to show why expertise really does matter. In the commercial, a surgeon comes into a hospital room and meets his patient. First, the doctor calls her Brenda, and she says, "It's Carol." The doctor then asks, "So which leg are we operating on?" And she says, "You mean arm." The doctor then waves off her obvious concern, saying, "It's all connected." Now, totally terrified, the patient finally asks the surgeon, "Are you sure you're an orthopedist?" The doctor responds, "Actually, I'm a Sagittarius." Well, pardon my skepticism. This is Thomas Friedman now. But I have serious doubts about the degree to which Trump and his team of budget surgeons have actually studied not just how to implement all the cuts and tariffs and freezes and dismissals they've rushed to make, but also the long-term effects they will have on the totality of American governance. Whose work are we watching here? That of a surgeon or a Sagittarius? Are we seeing the unfolding of a plan that's been stress tested, modeled for months, with all the implications fully understood? Or are we seeing the unfolding of a paper napkin from a Mar-a-Lago bar with some half-baked ideas, sketched out, and then chaotic seat-of-the-pants wrangling between Trump and his aides, again, most notably Elon Musk, over which industries will be hit and which will be spared? All right, it's chaos. It's not governance. It is absolutely not leadership. One last piece I want to read from is from the Daily Progress. The author here, Martin Schramm, he's also tried to make some sense of these first couple of weeks. All right. It's called the first 2 weeks, in fact. The first 2 weeks of Donald Trump's second presidency were astonishingly and then alarmingly different. On day one, Trump, ever the showman and salesman, had every reason to be hugely pleased with the way he scripted, performed, and sold his presidency 2.0. He gave all the people who made him what he is today precisely what they thought they wanted. Signing these tough executive orders, mass pardons for cop beaters, mass deportations, and more. And Trump gave his faithful, compelling, made-for-TV moments they can long remember of the day they saw him keeping his campaign promises and answering reporters' questions while he did his signing. As presidential leadership theatrics go, day one was boffo. And after week one, it seemed President Trump 2.0 might be able to sell Americans anything he wants, at least until his Make America Great Again faithful wake up. Well, the campaign promises that surrounded so many have ended up depriving their families of vital things to come. Well, that was week one from the Schramm article. Now to continue, which brings us to week two. Suddenly things seemed much different. The president, who'd hit the ground running on day one, tried to reprise his performance. But his first powerful footstep landed him firmly on an unturned rake. Trump's Office of Management and Budget issued a 2-page memo instructing federal departments and agencies to, quote, temporarily pause all financial assistance programs. It mentioned familiar chestnuts like foreign aid, but then it switched to Trump's mega garnish of raw politics, DEI, woke gender ideology, and the Green New Deal. The memo was signed by OMB's little-known acting director, Matthew Voth. Official Washington's instant reaction ran the gamut from agog to aghast. Trump's departments and agencies didn't understand what the mere two-page memo was telling them to do, or not to do. Freeze all aid? Well, not aid that's paid directly to ordinary people, so no freeze on Social Security and Medicare. But what about Medicaid, where money goes through the states to the people? Medicaid's online portals stopped working. Money to states stopped. So 22 states instantly sued Trump's government. Headlines called it bedlam, fear, and confusion. OMB's Voth rescinded his memo the next day. So what's that mean? White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt rushed in to, quote, end any confusion, end quote, posting on X. This is not a rescission of the federal funding freeze. It's simply a rescission of the memo. Huh? People said, I have no idea what that means. Well, then unfortunately there was a tragic mid-air collision. Army helicopter and American Airlines plane plunged into the Potomac, reportedly killing all passengers. As divers were still retrieving victims, Trump came to the White House press room and led the nation in grieving. The president asked us all to pause for a moment of silence out of respect to those who died and those who now grieve. This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history, President Trump said. As we soon witnessed, a presidential performance unlike any other history had ever witnessed, as Trump's 46 predecessors led our nation through tragic times, citing no substantiating evidence, Trump claimed the mid-air collision was due to decisions made by his two Democratic predecessors, Joe Biden and Barack Obama, and their Federal Aviation Agency that adopted their hiring policies of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Never mind that investigators hadn't even cited any wrongdoing by air traffic controllers anytime, anywhere. Trump said he had changed Obama's FAA hiring standards from very mediocre to, quote, extraordinary. Then Trump said Biden's FAA was actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities and psychiatric problems and other mental and physical conditions under diversity and inclusion hiring initiatives, end quote, from the President of the United States. Folks, this first 2 weeks of the presidency of Donald Trump has been an absolute, unequivocal leadership nightmare. So, what do? Well, we have to engage. We have to respond. We can no longer sit on our hands. A plan of action is needed, micro and macro. Micro, certainly the court system is a vehicle. Certainly communicating with your elected officials is another vehicle. Being involved, speaking up, speaking out, each and every one of these, each and every one of us as a citizen has the obligation, the responsibility to engage in our democracy. That's a lot of problem solving, but it is absolutely essential in light of the absolutely brief cameo I've given of what's transpired in the first 2 weeks. It is crazy town. Okay, so on a macro level, the framers of our Constitution made clear that the U.S. Constitution was not in concrete, that it can and should be amended as conditions warrant, as our world changes, as time passes. And they created a vehicle to do that. Article 5, Proposals of Amendments by Convention. Let me read Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, second option here, the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. Okay, so the vehicle exists also to amend the Constitution. And that could do a number of things regarding this attempt to absolutely disrupt government, the need for experts and expertise in all kinds of things to ensure that the people are taken care of. Again, in conclusion, there is nowhere that the executive orders have said how they're going to help people, the working people, the people in need. Folks, what people voted for isn't what has happened. What's happened is an autocrat requiring fealty. And that is not democracy. And for the purposes of this podcast, let me be crystal clear, that is absolutely not leadership. Okay, thanks everybody. Hope you enjoyed this. There's an awful lot going on. Stay tuned. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.